Then, of course, the only way you could improve bread is to twist dessert into it, right? Once you're addicted to bread, it's like, where do I go from here? Here's an idea: twist some dessert into it. The only problem with bread, there's really only one problem with bread. And the only problem really with bread is that just a little doesn't satisfy. And when you're done with the bread, you're not done forever. You're starting to think about the next slice of bread. That's how I work, especially around 9 p.m. If I go for bread around 9 p.m., I'm up in the wee hours of the night eating more bread. I'm not just awake. And the problem is that bread, as we understand it, never fully satisfies. It's satisfying, but it doesn't leave us full. It leaves us craving more bread. And there's reasons why that happens to our body. I learned that the more I eat, the more I want. It always leads to craving more. And it's filling, but it's not fulfilling, right? So this is important for us to know, because Jesus describes himself as the bread. And I like to think of him in the terms that he uses. And he says, I'm the bread of life. We're going to learn together here in John chapter 6. John chapter 6, Jesus is describing himself to people who are following him. And you can follow along with me here. We're going to look at Jesus in his own words describing himself as bread. Starting with verse 28. We're in chapter 6. We'll look at verse 28 all the way down. Specifically, we'll stop at verse 35. They replied, "We want to perform God's works too." Well, what should we do? Jesus told them, "This is the only work God wants from you. Believe in the one he has sent." They answered, "Show us miraculous sign if you want us to believe in you. What can you do? After all, our ancestors ate manna while they were journeyed through the wilderness. The scriptures say Moses gave them bread from heaven to eat." And Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, Moses didn't give you bread from heaven, my Father did. And now he offers you the true bread from heaven. The true bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." Everybody say life. He gives life to the world. We're going to dive into that. "Sir," they said, "give us that bread every day." What is the true bread that gives life to the world? Here's what Jesus is saying. It's Jesus himself. It's not religion. It's not the Christian faith. It's not churches. It's not membership. It's not prayer. It's not all the things that you can do to practice your faith. The life that came from heaven isn't living a better life as a Christian or to stop living a bad life as a non-believer. The real bread of life that God gives us to understand him, to consume him, to be nourished in him is Jesus himself. And Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." So who does Jesus think he is? Does he really think he's bread? Here's what he says. Jesus replies to them in verse 35, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty again." The original hearers of this, here's what they would have been listening and hearing. If they were listening to Jesus, they would have been hearing him talk about two things. Not just himself in bread, but they would have just seen Jesus miraculously feed a crowd of people. And they were a ravenous crowd, and it was a disruptive crowd, and Jesus had just soothed them by feeding them miraculously with just a few loaves and fishes. But they would have also been thinking about how God had provided manna for the Israelites in the desert. Two things they would have thought of. They just experienced a miracle with a couple of loaves and fishes from Jesus, and then their ancestors experienced a miracle as God fed them in the wilderness with manna that had come miraculously from heaven. But Jesus clarifies this, and I want you to notice this. Jesus makes a specific distinction here that there's two kinds of hunger. There's two kinds of hunger. There's physical hunger and there's spiritual hunger.